Okay, so we have been talking about different events that are going to be leading up to the American Revolution. So today we're going to focus on the French and Indian War. And we're going to start by doing a vocabulary because those are always fun. And we know that in PE you guys have been doing like different dances and stuff. So we thought it would be fun to incorporate that into our little lesson. So once I start playing this, while you guys are listening to this song, um, you guys can stay in your static groups, but stand up and do like your favorite dance moves and stuff, okay? But make sure you stay near your static group so we're staying in our families, okay? All right.
Everyone's trying to rise, ain't got no time to hide. Everyone's trying to rise, ain't got no time to hide. Everyone's trying to rise, ain't got no time to hide. Everyone's trying to rise, ain't got no time to hide. From Europe to the Americas, the British, they looking for settlement.
You guys can dance.
But the indigenous was already here living, they are the Native Americans.
We have some good dance moves in Miss Crowthrow's class.
Over land that they were swiping.
I know. Parsons is good. The floss.
They were willing to go to war. Blood, sweat, and tears. The war of 7 years. The natives were here. British didn't care. They colonized the land, took resources and wealth, and didn't want to share. Wanted it to themselves. France claimed some other land already. In the north and in the west, they had territory. They always traded with the natives. Loved the first from their buddies, making the pretty penny thing started getting ugly. Ohio River Valley, both the French and the British wanted it. French and natives were happy till British came interrupting it. French sent troops over to show who's running it. Natives got tired of taking land like they discovered it. Didn't want to hear none of it. Already had 13 colonies, but wanted more, so they told the French that they gotta leave. French told them that they were their first dismissed, so the British declared war 1756. Everyone's trying to rise, ain't got no time to hide. Natives been divided before colonists arrived. Different indigenous tribes fought in that bid, so some sided with Britain while others sided with France. Iroquois teamed up with the British. The Huron and other tribes teamed up with the French, and things were getting ballistic. They had common interests, the resources and riches, so they were willing to go to war. War started, the French were in demand, in charge. Teamed with indigenous tribes, formed a dominant squad. Used their war tactics like camouflage. Defeated Britain for 2 years, beat them like odds. They won that battle, but the war wasn't over. In 1758, Britain regained focus. The Secretary of State sent lots of money to soldiers. Got native support from the Iroquois, it was over. Started attacking and capturing all the French force. They couldn't fathom this force. The natives and the French lost. French surrendered and the British gained control, but spent so much on the war, now they were in the hole. So much debt that they couldn't afford the land. Started taxing the citizens that won the war for them. Now known as Americans, was tired of being used, so they fought back the American Revolution. Everyone's trying to rise, they got no time to hide. Natives been divided before colonists arrived. Different indigenous tribes fought in that bid, so some sided with Britain while others sided with France. Iroquois teamed up with the British. The Huron and other tribes teamed up with the French, and things were getting ballistic. They had common interests, the resources and riches, so they were willing to go to war.
All right, you guys. That was awesome. I hope that you enjoyed that fun little activity and to get your bodies moving and having fun while you're learning. So we passed out to you a passage that we're going to read together on the French and Indian War. And we also passed out to you a graphic organizer that we're going to do together and color in like the territories of sometimes that happens. The copier will miss a paper. Colton, did you have a question?
It wasn't really a question, but didn't the British let the French keep New Orleans?
Well, we're going to talk about their territories right now, okay? So, who was the French and Indian War fought by? Molly?
The French and Native Americans.
The French and Native Americans, and who else? Allie?
Britain.
Yes, Britain. And what were they fighting over?
Land.
The land. Okay, so we're going to talk about that in the passage, and we're actually going to focus on why the French and the British and the Indians were fighting over the land, okay? So while I read, make sure that you guys are thinking about why they're fighting over this land. It says, as the colonies grew, settlers began to dream of moving across the Appalachian Mountains and into the Ohio Valley, the region between Ohio and Mississippi rivers. The French had also dreamed of moving past the Mississippi River in these lands also. British settlers wanted to farm the rich soil there, and the French wanted to trap beavers and trade the furs. So why did the British want to settle here? Cameron? Well, that was the French, but why did the British want to settle here based on that passage? Makendra?
They wanted to farm the rich soil there.
Yes, and what did we say that the French wanted?
Trade.
Yes, to trade the furs. So let's go ahead and underline that. We're going to underline where it says the British settlers wanted to farm the rich soil there, and the French wanted to trap beavers and trade the furs. Great Britain and France could not agree about which country should control these lands. Both Britain and France claimed this area. In 1754, the French made good on their claim by building a fort where the city of Pittsburgh stands today. They call it Fort Duquesne. News of the fort alarmed the governor of Virginia. He ordered a small force of Virginia militia to drive the French out of the Ohio River Valley. Militias are small armies of citizens who are trained to fight in an emergency. To head the militia, the governor chose a 22-year-old volunteer named George Washington. Who do we know George Washington as today? Lucas?
The president?
Yes, the first president, right? So this is before presidency was even a thing. This is before the United States was even a thought. So this is just telling us that he was a leader even when he was only 22 years old.
That's young.
Yes, it is young. Washington's whistling bullets were the first shots in a conflict known as the French and Indian War. This war was part of a long struggle between France and Britain for territory and power. The Native Americans of the region sided with the French. The French and Native Americans had traded furs for years, and the Native Americans disliked the British because of how they treated the Native Americans. The Native Americans also wanted to protect their land so they could grow their crops and hunt in the woods for both meat and furs. So whose side did the Native Americans take? Molly? So whose side did the Native Americans take? The French. Yes, the French. It says the Native Americans of the region sided with the French. So why did the Native Americans side with the French? Carson?
Because the Native Americans usually would trade with them. There and the British would treat them like that.
Yeah. So they had like a better relationship with the French because
Native
they had been.
Americans and the British were enemies.
Yes. So they had more conflict, and the British didn't really treat them nicely. The French and the Native Americans had a history of trading and this friendship almost that they had. So the Native Americans went inside with the French, and we're going to underline that part of the passage as well. So we're going to underline where it says, the Native Americans of the region sided with the French. The French and the Native Americans had traded furs for years, and the Native Americans disliked the British because of how they treated them. The Native Americans also wanted to protect their lands so they could grow crops and hunt in the woods. All right. The British armies marched into the Ohio River Valley was a disaster. The troops' bright red uniforms made them perfect targets for French sharpshooters and their Indian allies. 2/3 of the soldiers were killed. So, do you think that their bright red coats had anything to do with the amount of soldiers that were killed?
Yes.
Yes. So it's kind of like when you guys go hunting. Are you supposed to wear like really bright colors? No, because it makes you an easier target for the animals to see, and then you're not able to hunt, right?
Or like camo.
Yes. So we're also going to talk a little bit about medicine during these wars because it talks about how 2/3 of their army were killed. Back then, it was hard for them to find medicine. The British Army had some medicine, but it wasn't a lot and definitely not enough to help them recover 2/3 of their soldiers, right? They spent more time looking for the medicine than actually getting any. So this taught the people a really big lesson in wars even now today. And that's the importance of having like medics and medicine on hand during these wars. Gray.
So, you are supposed to wear camo when you're hunting, but you're also supposed to wear like neonish orange so other hunters know you're out there and you don't get shot.
That is true. Yes. So it says Washington himself narrowly escaped death. I had 4 bullets through my coat and 2 horses shot under me. He wrote in his journal, showing great courage, Washington led the survivors back to Virginia. There he was greeted as a hero. The French and Indian War raged for 7 long years. The turning point came in 1759 when British troops captured Canada. In 1763, British and France signed a peace treaty ending the war. In this treaty, France ceded, and that means surrendered, or gave Canada to Great Britain. So how long did the war last?
7 years.
7 years. So we're going to go ahead and underline that as well. The French and Indian War raged for 7 long years. And I know it does talk about in the beginning of the passage how things started like happening in 1754, but the actual conflict did not start until 1756, and then it ended in 1763, which would make it 7 years. So we're going to go ahead and watch a brain pop. on the French and Indian War. Shane, you can turn off the lights.
Oh, that's James Wolfe. He was a British general who got killed during the French and Indian War. Okay. Dear Tim and Moby, please tell me about the French and Indian War. From Bobby. The French and Indian War was a conflict between France and Great Britain over territory in North America. It lasted from 1754 to 1763. Actually, American Indian nations fought on both sides, but we'll get to that in a minute. By the middle of the 18th century, the 13 British colonies were thriving. The land to the west was controlled by France, and they'd claimed most of Canada, too. Most of New France was relatively unsettled by the French. Fewer than 100,000 colonists lived there, and their economy revolved around trade with native peoples. Well, the borders between the French and the British territories were sort of vague. A lot of land had been claimed by both countries, including the Ohio River Valley. Sparks started flying when British fur traders moved into the region. The French wanted to control all the trade in what they considered their territory. And the British were undercutting their prices, offering the same goods at a lower cost. So the French warned their native trading partners to stop dealing with the British and began building military forts to keep the English out, including Fort Duquesne, built in 1754 at the intersection of 3 key rivers to cut off British expansion. That spurred the governor of Virginia to send in soldiers to kick out the French. They were led by a young colonel named George Washington. Washington and his men ambushed French forces at the Battle of Jumonville Glen, but they were eventually forced to surrender and head back to Virginia. The battle turned a territorial dispute into an open conflict. After this, the leaders of France and Britain started sending troops and supplies to North America. And that's how the French and Indian War began. Well, at the start, most native nations sided with France. The French tended to treat them with more dignity and respect. They viewed the nations as trading partners, not enemies. And unlike Britain, France didn't build farms and towns on native land. The Brits had some native allies, the Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy, a powerful 6-nation alliance to the east. Still, the British weren't very good at fighting on the uneven terrain and were constantly forced into retreat. But by 1758, things began to change. Back in England, a politician named William Pitt took over the planning for the war. He sent thousands of additional soldiers to capture the biggest French settlements in Canada. He increased popular support for the war in Great Britain and the American colonies. And he attacked French territories around the world, expanding the conflict into Europe and Asia. Yep, the French and British were fighting battles as far away as India, but the major action was still based in North America. The British Navy blockaded the Atlantic coast, preventing French ships from getting through. Soon, France couldn't reinforce its armies with new soldiers or supplies. Over the next 2 years, the British won victory after victory. The biggest came in 1759, when General James Wolfe captured the Canadian city of Quebec. Right, that's the scene from the painting. The next year, the British took Montreal, and the French surrendered for good. 3 years later, the two sides signed the Treaty of Paris. France had to give up virtually all of its North American territory. Britain took control of all land east of the Mississippi, and all of Canada, too. But that's not the end of the story. The war had left Britain deep in debt, so they started taxing the American colonists to pay it off. With no representation in England's government, the colonists weren't too thrilled about these new taxes. In fact, the issue sparked a revolution. Right, that's the one. Hey, speaking of which, can you change this painting back? I think we should go. Like, now.
Alright, you guys, so that was just a really quick video, and here we're gonna watch another really quick one.
In the 1750s, the British and French were claiming more and more land in the New World. The British had the 13 American colonies, but they also wanted the Ohio River Valley. The valley had rich and productive farmland. Many British had come to America specifically to farm. The French, on the other hand, wanted full access to the Ohio River Valley for their fur trade. They had trapped animals for their fur pelts for many years in Canada, but felt they should be able to claim land in America for France. To make a solid claim to the land, the French began a string of forts. The English sent a letter to the French by way of a young messenger, 21-year-old George Washington. The letter stated that the French claim was wrong and told them to leave. The French responded by capturing an English fort. This is what started the war. The French had a good relationship with the local Native American Indians. The Indians joined in the fight against the British. This is why the war was called the French and Indian War. The British had the advantage in the war because of their number of troops and militia, volunteer American soldiers. After many battles in 1763, the Treaty of Paris was signed and the war ended, with Britain the winner. The French lost any land they had once claimed in Canada and the Ohio River Valley.
That was like really, really short.
Alright, so now you guys should have out your graphic organizer and your art bag. We're going to use, you can use colored pencils or you can use crayons if your colored pencils aren't sharp, so you're not having to sharpen them right now. But we're going to go ahead and use red. And who owned the 13 colonies at this time? Allie. Britain. So we're going to go ahead and color the 13 colonies red for Britain. And how long did we say that the French and Indian War lasted? Colton? 7 years. So in the future, you guys might hear of the 7-Year War, and they are talking about this war. So just so when you hear that in the future, you guys know, okay?
That's what this partly said.
Yeah. So you guys are learning about that in English as well. Okay, and this little map that we're coloring, it doesn't have a key, so we're gonna make our own little key down here. So I'm gonna color a little red box, and then I'm gonna put the British colony. And then we're also gonna write up here so you guys remember that this is a war that lasted 7 years. What were they fighting over in the French and Indian War? Lucas?
Land.
Land. And what was that land called? They're fighting over.
America. Well, technically, the 13 colonies, or
Well, Britain was the 13 colonies, but what lands were they fighting over? Like with the British and the French both wanted this land. Gray, will you help him out?
They were fighting over Canada and the Ohio Valley.
The Ohio River Valley, yes. So we're gonna also write that on there. Right underneath there was the French and Indian War. We're gonna put fought over the Ohio River Valley.
Didn't they have some in Florida too?
No, we're gonna talk about who had that this time. So who owned the land that was like the Mississippi River and all to the left? So it'd be all of this land. Alec?
Right.
Yes, so that was the French's territory. So that's the land that they already owned. So we're gonna go ahead and draw a blue box. And put the French claims. And then we're going to talk about Florida. So who can remember from a previous lesson, like who owned or claimed Florida at this time? Molly?
That's Spain.
The Spanish did own Florida at this time. So were they part of this war?
No.
No, they weren't part of this war, but we are going to color in Florida as purple just to know that that land was claimed by Spanish.
Was the rest up
No, so the rest we're gonna color yellow. And if you see, you can see like the Ohio River right there. That is all the disputed area that the French and the British Native Americans are fighting over. So we're gonna go ahead and color all of this area yellow. And this is really good so you guys can get like a visual representation of the land that they were fighting over during this war.
I thought Russia, like the Russians had some of this.
This is all the disputed land that they are fighting over right here.
And then Britain won it all, and they became more wealthy and more powerful.
Yes, so if you remember in the video, it did say how Britain won. And they won all of their territory.
That's a lot.
Yeah, so we're going to put, next to the yellow box, we're going to put disputed area. Just so you guys can remember that that is all the area that they were fighting over. Alice?
When we played Florida, when Spanish moved at Florida to get
Carla?
Who was like protecting Florida to get Florida?
Well, the Spanish weren't part of this war, so that territory wasn't given to either the French or the British.
So they just like owned it?
The Spanish owned that land at that time, and they weren't part of the war, so nothing was going on in Florida.
Okay. Well,
It's just, we're just coloring it so you guys know that it was it was owned by the Spanish and it wasn't part of the war. No one was claiming that land at this time
so but
in the war.
why wouldn't would they want the land, the disputed area? Like
They weren't fighting over it. It was strictly between the French and the British and the Native Americans.
so they didn't care about that land. No,
Not at this
because they
time.
had a lot of land back in Europe.
Carson, do you have a question?
I'm saying like, did the Spanish ever get caught up in like the battle between them? Not like as if they're gonna start fighting. Like, did they? Because you see how like the disputed area is close to there.
It is close to them, but not at this time. They were not ever part of this French and Indian War.
I think what he is saying is I'm not saying like they're part of it, but did they ever get like caught up? Like when they were like trying to caught up while they're
There's other wars that we'll eventually talk about, like such as the American-Spanish War that you guys will learn about. But right now we're going to focus on the French and Indian War. And this side over here, that's French. So that's their flag. So we're going to write French and underline it. And why did we say that the French wanted this land, the disputed land? You can look back at your the passage as well if you can't remember. Dayton?
because they wanted the valley which had fertile land.
Not the French. Look back at the passage where we underlined. So what did the French want the land for? Carrie?
The trade.
Yes, to keep the trade going. So they wanted the Ohio River Valley to expand its colony and to trap and trade first. So the other side, we have the British flag. And what did we say that the British wanted this land for? Why were they fighting for this land? Makendra?
They wanted to find the rich soil there.
Yes, they wanted to farm on the fertile soil. So we're going to go ahead and write over there as well that the British wanted the Ohio River Valley to expand the 13 colonies and to farm the fertile soil. Carson?
Oh, I don't really have a question. I just need
Oh.
to sharpen my pencil.
Yes, you can sharpen your pencil. Lucas? We are going to color the flags, but right after we're done with the discussion, okay? Gray?
Did we play a Spanish flag? Wait, there's still some money we haven't colored.
That's all the land that we have to color right now on there.
But wouldn't the other land, like that other half point of America, wouldn't that be brought over the rest of? When did that happen? Like, when did they find it out? Like, which did it, like?
So this is just one event that's leading up to the American Revolution. So we're going to go over. Right now we're just focusing on the French and Indian War. Drew, do you have a question?
Yeah, so did the British or the French ever like, hey, if you want to help us fight Britain in this war and we might give you some sort of reward for fighting, did they ever like be tempted by that or something? Or did they just like isolate from the war?
No, they ended up signing a peace treaty at the end, and the British ended up winning. So we talked about the French and the British and what they wanted, but why did the Native Americans want this land? Why were they fighting in the war for the land? Gray?
They could continue their growing and hunting in the woods for furs and meat.
Yes, that's a great answer. He said, and they wanted to keep hunting and getting their furs, trading their furs. So why did they, the Native Americans, join the French? Caden?
Because they were living there and they've been trading with the French for a long time, and the British were being mean to them.
Yes, so they joined the French because they didn't like how the British was treating them. So we're going to write both of those down. We're going to first write down that they wanted to keep their lands. To grow crops and trap furs. And then we're also going to write down what Caden just said, and we're going to put that they joined the French. Because they did not like how the British was treating them.
Wait, wouldn't the French have higher numbers than the? Wouldn't British have like have lower people in their army? Like,
Not necessarily. It said in the video that the British had more numbers with their army.
but wouldn't the French and the Indians, like there's like at least 10,000 Indians on that land, and there's a whole lot of French. So wouldn't that just combine all of those and just make a big old number and overrule them?
Well, Britain.
Well, not always, numbers don't always mean, having higher amount of people either doesn't always mean that you're going to win. It came down to the supplies they had and the weapons and all of those were factors in there. So I know one of you guys asked if we are going to color the flags, and you guys can color them if you want. The French flag, these little things that they had on their flag were yellow. Is that what they're called? Cornelies? Okay. That's a Louisiana symbol, I know. I've seen it. And then the background was all blue. You can, yeah, you could use any blue that you want.
Like you can put any color you want, but as long as it's like blue.
I'm just showing you what it looked like at the time. All right, and then the British flag was red and blue and white, but the red was this big cross area. So you guys can go ahead and color that red.
Wouldn't that be just like similar to the American flag? Cause
A lot of the flags are similar, but they're also different, which makes them unique to the country that they're representing. And then these little triangles are blue. Ava, did you have a question?
I wasn't finished writing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you see it now? Yeah. Okay. So if you are done, you guys can go into your Google Classroom, and there's going to be an early finisher game on there, and it should be in your social studies area of it, and then we're going to go over that. We're going to play it. Once you guys are done, before you get out your Chromebooks, go ahead and glue your graphic organizer into your social studies learning log, and then you can go ahead and put the passage into your social studies pocket. Then you can get out your Chromebooks and go to Google Classroom.
what would happen if the war hasn't started, and what would happen like right now? Like if the war hasn't started and like if what like I'm saying if the war didn't start, what would happen? Like what would be happening right now?
I don't know. I don't know, because the events that happened were the French and Indian War.
So what I'm trying to do is trying to like go back to like go back in the past and like see what would happen if the war hadn't started and see if slavery would be still going on or would England still be right now. What would happen if the French and Indian War was right now?
Alright, you guys, once you have that glued in and your passage put away, make sure you're getting out your Chromebook so you guys can play the game that we have. Gray?
I get that Lucas is question out the numbers, but having a lot of numbers could be a disadvantage because you don't want to lose people.
I love how Table 2 has already gotten out their Chromebooks because they were working so hard and quietly. They're already getting logged on. I think I'm going to give Table 2 a table point. So the game should be in your Google Classroom under the social studies, and it should say like early finisher, and it's a brain pop game. It's like a timeline that you guys will put together on there based on events that have happened. And it's just like a simulation for you guys. Little fun activity for you guys to complete. Looks like Ava's already in. You shouldn't need a passcode. It should, there should be like an introduction, but then it says play now, I think, or start now, and you can play. You don't need headphones. You can just keep the volume low. You guys can start playing it once you get on there. Yes, that is it. Let me know if you guys need any help getting on there or finding it.